Hello, this is Dr. Jeffrey Gladden. We're here at the Gladden Longevity Podcast, and this is a podcast that's really dedicated to answering four questions. How good can we be? And that's a global question, really. How good can life be? How good can you be in all aspects of your life? How do we make 100 the new 30? How do we live young for a lifetime? And how do we actually crack the Hayflick limit? How do we live well beyond 120? And in today's episode, we had the opportunity to interview Melanie Avalon, who is a health influencer. She's an entrepreneur. She's a host of the Intermittent Fasting Podcast. She also has a Melanie Avalon Biohacking Podcast. She's well known in this space, has many followers, and she was interested to be on our podcast and share some of her ideas with us. And in this podcast, we shared some ideas back and forth that were quite interesting and stimulating, I think, for both of us. And I think you're going to find this educational and interesting. And it was a really fun show to do. Really enjoyed it. Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Gladden Longevity Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jeffrey Gladden. And I'm here today solo. Steve is feeling a little bit under the weather, from what I understand, so we'll wish him well. I'm sure he'll recover. And if he doesn't, we'll have to do something about that, but I'm sure he will. So today we're going to be having a conversation with Melanie Avalon, who's really become a health influencer, a podcaster, a biohacker, and has a passion for things related to intermittent fasting and biohacking in general, and certain supplements that she likes in particular. And I thought it'd be fun to have a conversation with her and kind of see what she's up to these days. So, Melanie, welcome to the Gladden Longevity Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor, and I'm really excited to be here. I feel like I'm in really good company, so thank you.
Oh, good. Good. I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, it should be fun. So bring us up to speed a little bit. You have your own personal journey as to how you got into this space. I think you were acting at one point in time. And how did you get from acting to health? That's not the jump that everybody makes, although there are a lot of healthy actors out there. But what was your story there?
Yeah, so it was a blend of a few things. I went to film and theater school at USC and was pursuing acting since I was like as long as I can remember. And
Okay.
I fell into the diet world, kind of like a lot of people do, with trying to lose weight and, maintain a camera ready body and all the things. And so I
Right.
stumbled onto, first it was low carb. And I'm not low carb now, but doing low carb was the first time I had a shift from just trying to lose weight to making a dietary change and realizing that it affected other things beyond just weight loss. And that's when I became really obsessed with the science of diet and really, optimizing taking agency with your own diet and how it could affect things. And then I found, go ahead.
Can I interrupt you for just a
Please.
second?
Yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? When you have this concept that the camera puts on 10 pounds and some of these other things that even the lay people have heard about. And then you have this sort of quest to be sort of camera ready. It happens in different professions, right? Television, acting, modeling, things like that, where people are focused on having a certain weight/body construct. And a lot of times what they're going for isn't exactly the healthiest thing, right? They're sacrificing muscle mass, which can lead to, loss of bone density over time. And there's a lot of sort of competing agendas in there, right? So did you find yourself in kind of the mix of all that, trying to figure that out for yourself?
100%. I was trying literally everything. I would say very casually. Like I felt like I was always flirting with different diets. But I did try. I mean, I tried like the vegan route for like a very brief amount of time. I'm a natural carnivore, so that did not last long. I was trying things. My poor college roommates. I was trying things like the cookie diet, where I would have like shipments of cookies shipped to our dorm, and I would like just eat these cookies. And it's funny because now I look back at the ingredients and they're basically like gluten. Like that's like, that's like all they are. But,
gluten diet, a gluten cookie diet.
Yeah, that's basically what it was. That didn't work either. And, but what's really interesting is, you were talking about how people are looking for this certain weight and often going about unhealthy ways to achieve it for camera purposes. The biggest change I think I ended up seeing wasn't even the weight aspect. It was the health changes with like the reduced inflammation. And I just felt like it brought in so much vitality when I discovered dietary changes and that worked, and
Okay.
fasting, for example. Yeah.
So tell us the ones that didn't work. I'm always curious to hear what actually didn't work. So we know that the vegan diet didn't work. We know the cookie diet didn't work. What else was in there?
The constant theme was just calorie counting, which
Okay.
I think calorie counting works. It's just pretty miserable and it's not very sustainable. So I was never happy doing it. Like I was always thinking about food, like all the time, like my
Mhm.
next meal. I've never been a moderationist, so I don't do
Okay.
well with like eating, a little bit.
Small portions.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
So
Yeah, it's tricky when you're hungry all the time. There's all the data, primate data, and human data now too, on kind of chronic caloric deprivation having an impact on longevity. And we all sort of know that. And yet it's really, really difficult to walk around hungry all the time. You can kind of do it when your willpower's up, but when your willpower's down, it's really difficult to do, I think. Did you find yourself sort of falling off the wagon, so to speak, with regards to that? I mean, I would think it'd just be really difficult to maintain.
I did, and I'm glad you mentioned that about calorie restriction and longevity because, like I said before, calorie restriction it does work. Because I think people will often say, "Oh, it doesn't work. It slows your metabolism. You'll just gain the weight back." If you actually were to stick to it, there's people like in the Calorie Restriction Society who are doing it their whole life.
Right.
So it does work. It's just not very sustainable.
Yeah.
So.
We did a podcast you might be interested in if you haven't had a chance to listen to it yet. It's with a company called Mimeo, Mimeo, that basically analyzed people that were fasting for extended periods of time, like 72 hours and things like that. And then they were analyzing the blood and looking at all the hundreds of different proteins and biomarkers that changed with fasting. And they were looking to isolate it. What are the key players here that actually give the benefits of fasting? And what they did was they figured out what it was. It's something called PEA and OEA. Those are two endocannabinoids. And then there was some niacin in there. And what was the other one?
Spermadine, I think.
Yeah, spermadine. Yep, spermadine. And so what they did was they put that in a pill, and you may be familiar with that, Mimeo. And so you can take it even while you're eating to get the benefits of fasting without fasting, which is really pretty fascinating. And it shows that if you take this when you're eating a meal, it actually increases reverse cholesterol transport, which means it's getting cholesterol out of your plaque, out of your arteries, out of your cell membranes where it can cause Alzheimer's and things. So you're actually doing very, very healthy things, even in the face of eating. And if you add it to a fast, like say you are going to fast for 24 hours or do a 5-day fast mimicking diet, right? You can really kind of turbocharge that period of time. So anyway, I think that's interesting. I don't know if many people in the entertainment world, fashion world, whatever, are aware of that, but it's just dawning on me. That would be a way for them, as they struggle with this, at least they'd be getting some health benefits if they could loosen up their diet a little bit. I mean, their body comp would probably change a little bit, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, I had a really long call with Mimeo. I'm really fascinated by what they're doing. And I also co-host the Intermittent Fasting podcast. And
Yes.
my co-host Vanessa on that show, she's a big fan of them. I think she works with them on the Optimal Protein podcast. It's like all the podcasts. But no, I'm really, really fascinated by it. And I haven't personally tried it, but it's really interesting. The thing I wonder about it is, isolating these different markers and things that are activated by fasting. How much does it translate to, your body creating all of that endogenously from the fasted process versus, taking a supplement? I just feel like there's a lot more research there that we could do and learn from.
Yeah, for sure. There's no doubt that I don't think there's any supplement that can, like, people talk about exercise mimetics, right? Well, if you take this supplement, you'll be getting the benefits of exercise. Well, that's not true by 1,000 miles, right? So exercise has so many benefits that it's going to be impossible to replicate that with one pill. And I think, to your point, I think fasting has many benefits. But I think being able to, increase autophagy and decrease brain inflammation and increase reverse cholesterol transport, stuff that they're showing, is an intriguing thing. So anyway, I'd encourage you to try it and see what you think. So,
I definitely agree. I think they were doing, when I talked to them, they were doing some reformulations. So I was
they are.
gonna wait for the new version. But yeah,
That's
I
right.
definitely have to try it.
That's right. Yeah, I think it's coming out shortly. We just had them on again recently, or talked to them recently. With regards to the dietary things that you've tried, what was it that you found that actually worked the best for you?
Yeah. So like I said, I tried low carb and it was the whole Atkins thing. And
Mm-hmm.
that was the first time I really saw like a change. And I think it's because I was, first experiencing ketosis. And
Mm-hmm.
fasting though was the thing that really lit it up for me. And this was because fasting is really popular now. Like people talk about it. Like I can say time restricted eating even and people will know what I'm talking about. But this
Right.
was quite a while ago. Nobody was doing it. And I decided to do it for a day. I said I was going to just not eat all day and then just eat like a massive meal at night. And I was going to do it for a week. And I never stopped. And that was over a decade ago. So
Okay.
and here we
Interesting.
are. Mm-hmm.
I will tell you about a paper that came out in the teens, actually, or maybe it was 2020. Anyway, they were analyzing data from, I'm going to say 20,000 people, and it was over about 14 years. And they were looking, it was actually part of a cardiovascular study, but they looked at people's eating habits, the people that ate 3 meals a day, 2 meals a day, and 1 meal a day, which would kind of, coincide with intermittent fasting, right? If you're eating 2 meals or 1 meal a day, certainly 1 meal a day. What they found was that the people that had the best outcomes, the lowest incidence of heart disease and the lowest mortality, were the people that ate 3 meals a day.
Mm.
The people that ate 1 meal a day had an 80% increase in mortality and cardiovascular disease. And I think it was really kind of an eye-opening study for me because we know that fasting is very, very beneficial. But all of a sudden it dawned on me, it's not that fasting is bad. It's that when you cram all those calories in one meal, it's a massive stress on the body. We think eating is restorative, but it's really actually a stressful activity. The body has to, digest, accumulate, distribute all those calories. And so eating a big meal is really kind of a big stress. And we tend to think of eating as being restorative, but when we load so many calories at once, it actually, it's a big stress on the body, which is why people feel tired like after a big meal, right? It's like you got to go take a nap. So anyway, what it got me thinking about was, okay, if you're going to restrict eating into a smaller window, that's fine, but do it in smaller quantities so that the body's not, inundated with all this load of work to do, so to speak. So that's kind of where we've come out based on some of that.
Okay, this is an interesting conversation. I don't think I've had this specific conversation before. So that study, what was the time span that it covered?
It was over 15 years they followed these people.
So I would have like a lot of questions because it sounds like being epidemiological and correlational. I think it's hard to parse out because would just be looking at people over 15 years and especially over amount of time when fasting wasn't as much in the popular lexicon, presumably. So you would wonder the people who are doing, the 1 meal situation or the 2 meal situation, are they like, what type of people are they and what context are they doing that in? Because that might include, for example, people who are just, breakfast skippers in general, who are doing like the 2 meals, who we know often correlate to less than ideal lifestyle habits because of the historical narrative we've had surrounding breakfast. My point is, I wonder if it's, the actual 1 meal versus the 2 meal versus the 3 meal that's causing the problem, or if it's a lot of factors in the people's lives beyond that.
This episode of the Gladden Longevity Podcast is brought to you by the new Gladden Longevity anti-inflammatory shroom formula.
A little background, our anti-inflammatory formula is a potent blend of adaptogenic mushrooms specifically designed to support your body's natural defense mechanisms to reduce inflammation. This unique formula contains a powerful mix of medicinal mushrooms, including agaricus, reishi, cordyceps, and maitake, known for their immune-boosting and anti-inflammatory properties. Together, they do a great job of turning down a major driver of inflammation.
I've been a big fan of adaptogenic mushrooms for a number of years now, and I was really excited to find you all were coming out with this. This is a superior product to what I've tested on the market.
Yeah, we love it, and our clients love it as well. Again, this is a tincture, so we will put it in tea, we'll put it in a smoothie, we'll put it in water and drink it. But to know that you're actually able to decrease NF-kappa beta, which is a major driver of inflammation in your body with this, it just goes along with everything else that we know about aging, that inflammation is a key driver of the aging process. So we love going straight at the heart of it with this formula.
Get 10% off your order of the new Gladden Longevity anti-inflammatory shroom formula when you use the code podcast10 at gladdenlongevitysshop.com. That's podcast10 at checkout when you visit gladdenlongevitysshop.com.
Experience the power of adaptogenic mushrooms with our anti-inflammatory formula and embrace a healthier, more balanced lifestyle. Well, of course, everybody has factors in their lives. I mean, we'll never get away from that in a biological system. What they did find was that people that skipped breakfast also had like a 30% increase in mortality. People that skipped lunch, it was less of an impact. And people that skipped dinner, if they were going to skip a meal, had the least impact. So the best meal to skip would be dinner. We've known that for a long time because, the body, has you eat in the evening and then you're relaxing and going to bed. You're better off to fuel your body in the morning with calories and then fast through the evening. It's difficult to get people to do that because we have such a culture of eating dinner. They sit down with their families, they go out with their friends, they do whatever, right? There's this big culture of eating dinner. So it's easier to skip breakfast or lunch. But I found in the practice, when people wanted to do intermittent fasting, if I could get them to flip that sequence, a lot of times they would actually break through that plateau that they'd hit and start to, get where they wanted to go. So I'll send you some of these papers. It's quite interesting. It is an observational study. It was done in conjunction with people that were looking at development of cardiovascular disease, and they pulled out this subpopulation looking at people based on how many meals a day they ate. So, it's a study, it's observational. But it's still interesting. It raises a question for sure, right? It's not like it's a 2% increase. So
no, I would love to read it, and it's a question that has haunted me for so long because I'm like my circadian rhythm. I'm a night person. I eat late. I do exactly what you're talking about. So I eat like a massive meal, high protein, like high load, like you said, eating. I remember the time, like the moment I realized that all eating is always inflammatory at some point, and I was like, this is just really tragic to think about.
It's a stress. Yeah, and people that eat high protein diets, J.J. Verdon's all about protein and eating protein first, and protein can be satiating, and people need protein, but when people are on high protein diets, they're getting so much methionine, and methionine is accelerating the aging process. Plus, it's loading the kidneys. People on high protein diets don't live as long. There's lots of data on that. And most of the green zones are eating more high carb diets, interestingly enough, right? Lots of fresh vegetables, produce, things like that, carbs, a bit of protein, but it's not a protein heavy diet in those blue zones. So,
yeah. And about the high protein, it's interesting. Well, again, going back to the correlational thing again, I wonder with just looking at people on high protein diets. So people on high protein diets in today's culture are pretty much going to be a high everything diet. Like, because there's not a lot of people doing high protein, just high protein. Like they're pretty much eating, they're pretty much having more protein because they're eating more in general. It's funny. Yeah. I interviewed Dr. Valter Longo a few times, and I asked him the same question. I wanted to know, because, he's very much about the lower protein intake. So I told him exactly what I do, which I just told you, which is that I eat massive amounts of protein at night. But then I fast during the day all day. And I wanted to know, would the fasted period kind of offset that, increase in IGF-1 and, the inflammatory amino acid profile from methionine and things like that. And he basically was like, it could, we don't know. So err on the safe side. Probably don't do that. But he did not say no. So I was like, okay.
He didn't say no.
He said maybe.
Yeah, but I think based on this data, it's a little bit of a cautionary tale, right? So I think the other thing that we do with our clients, quite honestly, is to do genetic testing on people and look at their immune systems and their gut biomes and their we do a 2-hour glucose tolerance test with an insulin curve on everybody. And because we can figure out so much about, how food is interfacing with them and how they're built to eat, how many copies of the amylase gene do they have, how efficient are they at processing carbs, all these different kinds of things. And then looking at their nutrient status and seeing, what kind of nutrients do they need in their diet and what kind of nutrients do they need for their methylation cycle to work and their neurotransmitters to work and things like that. So when you get kind of a global picture for an individual, then you can I think then you're at a point to actually make a recommendation. Okay, these are things that are actually healthy for you. And then we coach people about if you want to compress it into 6 hours or 4 hours, or whatever you want, even 8 hours, space it out a little, just eat smaller amounts so you're not getting that giant load. That's kind of how we go about it. So.
Yeah, no, I love that. And if you are doing the giant load like me, possibly supporting with things like HCl or digestive enzymes or, helping out to digest
Sure.
that could probably be helpful.
Yeah. So, yeah. And have you used any acrobose?
Acrobose?
Yeah. Or sugar to fiber? So
no,
you can.
No.
So these are molecules that actually will block sugar absorption. So if you eat carbs, you can take this, and it's a prescription. It's used for diabetics, but it actually ferments the sugar. It does lead to some flatulence. I'll testify to that. But if you take it, it actually keeps the sugar from being absorbed and spiking your blood sugar. So that's pretty interesting. And sugar to fiber is a product that we had on the show where it'll actually take sugar in the diet and turn it into fiber. There's plant enzymes that will turn sugar back into fiber.
Oh, wow.
And it's in this pill, and you can take it before you eat, and you can actually eat carbs, and it will turn it back into fiber, which of course is good for your gut, and butyrate production, BDNF production in the brain, all the different things that come from fiber. So it's pretty interesting. There are ways to navigate this, right? But I've really just become a fan of not dumping a massive stress on the body. It's kind of like, well, we're going to go sprint up the mountain for, an hour. And it's like, it's too much exercise, right? It's too much. It's too big a load. So
I guess the question is as well, the comparison between having that massive stress, like we're talking about, and this massive digestive, load and going through that, but then having that, nothing, like a longer fasted period.
That's a stress too, right? That's a stress too. So you're basically, you're now coaxing the body into the stress of being calorie deprived. And then you're putting it you're really, it's kind of like swinging from one extreme to the other. We're totally calorie deprived. Now we're totally calorie saturated. Now we're totally calorie deprived. There's a lot of momentum going on there, right?
It is. Yeah, it is. I do wonder though, if it can be a beneficial approach just with, so when you're in the fasted state, you're going through all of those reparative processes and then, really increasing metabolic flexibility and insulin sensitivity and upregulating your ability to produce like growth hormone. And so then when you actually eat, then it's like that process. And then you're doing that, assimilating.
Right. I get it. It wasn't until I saw this article where people that ate one meal a day had a higher mortality. And it was like, all of a sudden a light switch went off for me. It was like, okay, well, maybe that strategy is not the best strategy, right? Maybe there's a better strategy. So I'm not married to anything except trying to get it right. And so I'm happy to learn from any new data that comes along. But yeah.
Yeah, what I would love to see in that study, and I'll have to look at it, is the breakdown of the data, like within the actual, because it could be, I feel like so my approach is I just want people to find what works best for them. And so like, if you were to ask me, I do think the best approach for most people would be a time restricted eating. Like if you could take out your circadian rhythm, take out the socialness, take out what you like, I think a earlier eating pattern, not like way early. Cause like once we wake up, like right in the morning, we actually have a cortisol spike and we're not in a, conducive.
Yeah. We don't need to eat right then. We don't need to eat right then. Yeah, that's right.
But I do think it would be daylight hours and it would be, a little bit after waking up, it would be finishing before the sun goes down. But for me though, that like just doesn't work in my, I don't like it. I feel like finding the pattern that you can consistently stick to probably outweighs sticking to some idealized form that doesn't suit your constitution.
Well, I think the way to do that is to actually test it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So right now it's a hypothesis, right? This is a hypothesis. And so the way to either prove that or not, or prove that it needs to be modified would be to test it. So you can do blood testing through the day and see what your stress levels are, what your cortisol levels are, what your blood sugars are, what your blood insulin levels are, what your inflammatory markers are, things like that. And then you can do it through the meal. If you did that for 24 hours and took, I don't know, 6 or 7 samples, you'd probably come out with a little bit of a map in terms of, what was the spike. And maybe you're perfectly adapted to this. Maybe you're the person that's somehow perfectly adapted to that. But I think it raises enough of a question that I think trying to study it and see would be interesting. So.
Oh, I agree. And that's why I'm wearing right now a CGM so I can see my blood sugar and an Oura ring, see all my vitals. But yeah, I wish they would do more studies directly comparing. What I would love to see is more studies directly comparing like a 1 meal a day evening only situation to a 1 meal a day morning only situation, or just more 1 meal a day studies that compare them to eating throughout the day that are controlled rather than correlational.
At the end of the day, though, I think it always boils down to an N of 1, right? Which is you or me, like what works for me, right? I mean, I can look at a study and say, okay, well, this is giving me some general guidelines, but what works for me, right? And that's kind of what I really want to know, what you really want to know in the end, probably what your listeners want to know too. So that's where I kind of get into the testing mode of, okay, well, let's figure this out for me, what actually seems to work. So,
yeah, no, I love that.
Yeah, fun. So what else are you thinking about outside the dieting arena?
Yeah, so that was one whole sphere. And then I really fell into the whole, quote, biohacking world, which is, so much of what we've talked about on the show already and, things you talk about with your guests. But that came about because I was trying to solve some health issues and I just started trying to do anything and everything to feel better. And it ended up becoming the things that are, quote, biohacking now. So I was playing around with blue light blocking glasses and working on my circadian rhythm and tracking my sleep and everything way before people were really doing that.
So you might I ask you, and feel free to say no, but if you're comfortable, maybe you could share what issues you ran into that kind of pushed you down that path.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I graduated from college and moved into my new apartment. And I was so fueled by adrenaline and just the wonder and allure of life that I was powering through. But I had an underlying fatigue and I started getting really bad insomnia and brain fog and ultimately ended up getting diagnosed with so many things. Hypothyroidism, mercury poisoning. I was getting CO2 poisoning every night in my apartment. I had mold poisoning. Carbon monoxide from that.
Wow.
We had like this 1970s
That's pretty
oven.
intense.
When I moved out, the gas company came and they were like, oh, they shut it off. They were like, this is leaking every single night. I was like, okay, great. I've been using this for 2 years. Yeah, I was just so fatigued and just honestly at one point I felt like I was dying and and anemia. So and all the things.
Yeah.
But
that's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm so grateful for it now because it just made me religiously research so much just to try to, fix myself. And then I would discover things that really worked. And I just had this urgent need to share it with people. And, this was the podcasting sphere.
Good for you.
For that.
Yeah. Yeah. Good for you. Yeah, I think it's interesting how many people in this field have their own personal story, right? Their own entryway into it through their own struggle. If you've listened to this podcast, you've heard me talk about what I went through and how I ended up leaving cardiology to actually pursue healthcare instead of sick care and things like that. So it's it becomes very personal, quite honestly, which is kind of cool. I think it fuels our passion for what we're doing for sure. So yeah.
It was like every new diagnosis or issue, I was like, oh, okay, well, this is an opportunity to learn more about this one thing. And so now when listeners have issues and everything, I have so much empathy for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a supplement that you've developed, isn't there, in some way, shape, or form? You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So so on the supplement side of things, that's also an area where I felt like I was, quote, biohacking. I was always I was doing like methylene blue like a decade ago before people were, talking about that. But I was always, I'm neurotic with what I put in my body, and I'm like a sensitive butterfly. And so it was always really hard for me to find supplements that had ingredients that I felt good about. There's so many loopholes and
Fillers,
fillers and
magnesium stearate and
yeah.
right.
It's so hard to find things without them, especially like even like rice, which can be benign, but it's in so many supplements. And one of my favorite supplements was serapeptase, which, have you taken serapeptase before?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's funny because I feel like it's kind of a fringe supplement. But when I first started the intermittent fasting podcast, like 6 or 7 years ago, my co-host at the time, Jen Stevens, she doesn't really take any supplements, but there was one supplement she takes, and it was serapeptase. And I was like, I take serapeptase. So we had this like bonding moment, and we kind of started this serapeptase, excitement on the show, and so many listeners, wanted it. And what it is it's a proteolytic enzyme created by the Japanese silkworm. It helps the silkworm break down its cocoon when it's, coming out, and it breaks down non-living tissue, and it selectively spares living tissue. And so when we take it as humans in the fasted state, it goes into the bloodstream, and it basically breaks down, quote, problematic proteins throughout our body. So it can help with inflammation and, brain fog, and help reduce cholesterol. And, in vitro and in vivo studies in animals have shown that it can break down amyloid plaque. So lots of things.
It's interesting because it has an analgesic effect too. It's used in dental procedures and things like that. It's also a fibrinolytic, which means that it can keep the blood from clotting. And then one of the interesting things about it, as I was researching it a little bit further, was it can break down biofilm, which is a film that enables bacteria to kind of reside. So you're getting anti-inflammation, analgesia, fibrinolytic activity, breaking down biofilm, and then it can actually decrease edema and swelling, all of which is pretty helpful. So pretty cool.
No, I love that you're familiar with it. And the biofilm studies are interesting. I think they were looking at it in surgery because they have an issue with or implants, because biofilms accumulate on
implants. Yeah. They talk about it in dental procedures for like when they have impacted teeth and things like that, being able to help decrease the swelling that occurs there and things like that. So
yeah.
And
so
pain.
I absolutely love it. And but I wanted to make my own version, because all of the versions on the market that I was taking, they were often had these enteric coatings, and there's it's kind of sketchy about what those are made of. And I was like, I got to make a version that doesn't have this, that still delivers it to where it needs to be delivered. So that was my first supplement that I launched, and it was just so, I'm sure, as with your own supplement line, it's just so nice to have agency to create like exactly what you want to be taking yourself.
Yeah. Exactly. No, it's super fun. No, it's very fun. It's fun to go down the rabbit hole on these things and figure out, how something works, how it can be helpful, who would benefit from it, how to combine it with other things that have synergistic effects, things like that. That's kind of, we spend a lot of time going down those avenues, if you will, with our clients in terms of optimizing their scenarios. Yeah. So it's a super cool area.
Yeah, I know. I made the first one, and then I was like, oh, it's like my eyes were opened. I was like, I want to make all the things, everything I'm currently taking. I want to make my own version of it.
Fun. Yeah, very fun. What are your plans going forward with the podcast? Multiple. What direction are you headed at this point in time?
Yes, I've been talking about the intermittent fasting podcast, which is me and my co-host, and we answer questions about intermittent fasting. Surprise. But the Melanie Avalon Biohacking podcast, that's the one with all the guests and, the authors and doctors and researchers. And I just like you, doing this show, I just am so grateful and obsessed, because I basically get to read the books I would be reading anyways, and then ask, the questions directly to the authors. And I really like so a few things. I really like expanding. I don't know about you. Do you find that everything you keep in the genre of longevity, or do you ever get like pitches from people and it's like not really related, but you really just want to read their stuff?
Well, longevity is really a big space, the way I conceive of it. So, in the book that I published recently, back in September, I guess it was, 100 is the New 30, I have 4 different sets of circles there. So there's a life energy circle, which is really, think of it as the psycho-spiritual space. And then following that is longevity itself, where we're going after the drivers of aging, the actual hallmarks of aging. Then you have the health circles, where we're going after all the organ systems. And then you have the performance circle, where we're really going after how you maintain being fast, agile, strong, quick, balanced, right, with great flexibility, great cardiovascular endurance. And how do you enter into flow states, right? How do you actually get into flow states and maintain that, right? So in that, there's really a lot of depth. And then there's a couple of other things that I'm going to write about shortly, which is about environments, and the environments we control and the environments we don't control, and how to actually navigate those as well. So it's pretty, my point being, there's almost everything can come into it. So if somebody's a race car driver and they want to talk about race car driving, it's like, okay, well, that fits into performance. Let's talk about your nervous system and how you train and how you do this and how you do that. And, how you deal with the toxicity of being around fumes. And it's everything ties into longevity, right? So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I feel the same, because I remember in the beginning, especially when I was first starting the show, I was like, oh, well, it has to be this thing. And it has to be like biohacking. It has to be. But now I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to interview whoever I want to interview because it all relates, because it's life.
It's life. That's right. Yeah. You should have me on your show sometime.
Yeah. No, we should just talk. And I would love to read your book. So that's awesome.
Yeah. It's on Amazon. You can grab it. So
perfect.
Well, Melanie, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. We'll have to do it again.
No, yeah, this would be absolutely amazing. And I'll give some links for listeners. So actually,
tell us a little bit about that. What do you want them to know? Where can they find you and things like that?
If listeners would like to check out my serapeptase, and then I also have 2 magnesiums. I have a 3 and 8 for the brain, and then a full body blend. And then I have a berberine for blood sugar control. And then many things to come. So that's all at avalonx.us, avalonx.us. And if you guys use the coupon code Gladden, Gladden, that will get you a discount on that. So that's awesome. And then the shows I mentioned, and I have a few things coming. I have an EMF blocking product line coming out that I'm really excited about. So stay tuned for that. And then I'm developing an app right now that it's my biggest project to date. So I'm really excited about that one.
Outstanding. Beautiful. All right. Well, check all that out. Really appreciate you sharing that with us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This has been so awesome. I feel like there's so many things we could talk about. Like, there's just so many things.
It's endless, quite honestly. Yeah, for sure. We'll talk again, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Gladden Longevity Podcast. If you would like more information on what we've discussed or other topics, please reference the show notes or go to gladdenlongevitypodcast.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter by searching Gladden Longevity. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to get future episodes delivered to you, and share our podcast or this episode with someone in your life that you may find benefit. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another exciting episode. The Gladden Longevity Podcast is provided for informational purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of a physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. The use of any information and materials linked to this podcast